Sagittarius. A family member envies you, and they tried to sabotage your path. There is a particular kind of heartbreak that doesn't come from strangers or lovers, but from those who share your blood. And Sagittarius, when the ache of betrayal comes from inside your own family, it strikes a place far deeper than words can reach. This isn't just about jealousy. This is about the quiet resistance you feel when someone close to you tries to dim your light, not because you did anything wrong, but because you dared to shine. You have always walked through life with an open heart. Your generosity is natural, your optimism sincere. You uplift those around you not because it's a strategy, but because it's your nature. But lately, something has felt off. Subtle glances, misunderstood intentions, doors that used to open now quietly close. And the worst part? You're beginning to sense that someone within your own circle, someone you once trusted, is not rooting for you. They're resisting your rise, sabotaging your joy, not out loud but in whispers, in omissions, in small betrayals that accumulate. In this video, we'll gently unpack this wound. We'll look at the pain that comes when your light becomes someone else's shadow. We'll explore how to stay open-hearted without shrinking yourself for others' comfort. And above all, we'll walk toward freedom together. If this speaks to something stirring in your spirit, I invite you to stay. And if you feel supported here, feel free to like, share, or subscribe. You belong to yourself, Sagittarius, and no one can take that away. Gate 1. You've always been generous and sincere, but they misunderstood it. Sagittarius, your heart has always been generous, so generous in fact that you often give without thinking twice. Whether it's time, energy, resources, or simply your radiant presence, you offer it freely. You don't do it to impress. You don't do it to compete. You give because it's who you are. Open-spirited, guided by a sense of higher truth and a longing to uplift. You believe in people even when they don't believe in themselves. And this sincerity, this fire that moves through you, is often misunderstood by those who've never learned how to hold light without trying to possess or extinguish it. Some people admire your energy, others are quietly intimidated by it. And sometimes those two responses exist within the same person, especially when that person is a family member who has long wrestled with their own sense of inadequacy. You might not have seen it coming. Maybe they once clapped for you, praised you, smiled through your milestones, but something beneath the surface felt heavy, off, like their joy for you was laced with something else, something unspoken. And as time passed, the weight of that unspoken energy began to show up more clearly, not in grand betrayals but in the small ways they pulled back. The questions they stopped asking, the support they stopped offering, the passive-aggressive comments dressed in jokes, the subtle shifts that left you confused and deeply hurt. You may have thought, maybe I'm imagining this. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. But Sagittarius, you weren't. What you were feeling was real. You were sensing an energy that words refused to admit. You were picking up on the friction between your light and their shadow. The truth is, your natural warmth can sometimes be misread as arrogance by those who haven't yet found peace within themselves. Your confidence may be interpreted as superiority, your enthusiasm mistaken for attention-seeking. But you were never showing off, you were simply showing up. And that, to someone who feels small inside, can be threatening. I once worked with a Sagittarius named Darren, whose older sister had always played the role of the responsible one in the family. He was the free spirit, the dreamer. When he landed a big opportunity overseas, her congratulations came with a tight smile and a sentence he'd never forget. Well, it must be nice to be lucky. First he brushed it off, but slowly more comments followed. She minimized his efforts, made subtle digs when others praised him, and even discouraged other family members from fully celebrating his wins. It was like my success made her feel invisible, he told me. But I never asked for that. I just wanted her to be happy for me. And Sagittarius, maybe you felt the same. You weren't trying to outshine anyone. You were just being yourself. But in doing so, you accidentally illuminated someone else's insecurities. And instead of healing those insecurities, they projected them onto you. This is not your fault. It's painful to be misunderstood, especially by someone you expected to be your safe place. It's disorienting when your love is met with resistance. But your worth is not dependent on their comfort. You are not responsible for managing someone else's wounds, especially when those wounds start bleeding into your joy. And yet, I know you still feel torn. Because you care. Because you're loyal. Because even when someone wounds you, you want to believe there's still a way back. But Sagittarius, please hear this. Love without self-awareness becomes entitlement. And if someone cannot hold space for your joy without turning it into a reflection of their lack, that is not a relationship built on love. It's built on comparison. This is your invitation to reframe the story. What if the way they treated you was never about you? What if it was about their own pain? Their own inner child who never felt seen? Their own battles you never knew about? That doesn't excuse their behavior, but it does release you from the illusion that you caused it. You didn't. You were simply the mirror. You reflected back to them what they weren't ready to face in themselves. And now you are being asked to make a sacred choice. Do you dim your light to preserve their comfort? Or do you keep shining, even if it means walking forward without their approval? This is where your power lives, Sagittarius. In your ability to stay true to your fire, without becoming bitter. In your willingness to remain kind, without remaining small. In your strength to honor the depth of your giving, while no longer offering it where it is resented or rejected. This wound, the wound of being misunderstood, is one of your oldest. But it's also your gateway to freedom, because once you stop needing to be understood by everyone, you begin to understand yourself more clearly. And from that place you stop explaining. You stop shrinking. You stop apologizing for the space you were born to take up. You belong, Sagittarius. Not because someone says so, but because your soul says so. And in the next gate, we'll step deeper into the shadows, into the ways envy can quietly manifest in sabotage, and how to spot it before it spreads. Gate 2. A family member felt overshadowed by your light, and it grew into envy. Sagittarius, you've always had a natural brightness about you. Not just in how you speak or move or dream, but in the very essence of who you are. You walk into a room and people feel it. The freedom, the enthusiasm, the genuine curiosity about life. You don't shrink. You expand. And you've never needed to compete with anyone because your compass points inward. Your direction is guided by spirit, not approval. But sometimes that light you carry can trigger others, especially those who've spent their lives in the shadows of their own fear. What begins as a quiet discomfort can slowly evolve into something much more corrosive. Envy. This is where it often begins, small invisible moments. They notice the way others listen when you speak. They feel the warmth you receive without asking. They begin comparing their path to yours. Maybe they've followed rules their whole life, done everything right, yet still feel unseen. And then there's you, living with passion, speaking your truth, stumbling sometimes, but always landing on your feet. To someone trapped in self-doubt, your ease can feel unfair. Your confidence can feel like arrogance. And your joy, especially when they're unhappy, can feel like a personal insult, even when you've done nothing wrong. They don't say it out loud. In fact, they may not even realize it fully. But envy is rarely loud in its early stages. It hides. It rationalizes. It wears masks like concern or protectiveness, or just being realistic. And that's what makes it so disorienting. You begin to feel something off, but it's hard to name, hard to prove, hard to confront. It's especially painful when this person is someone you love. An older sibling, a cousin, an aunt or uncle, perhaps even a parent. Because part of you wants to believe that love should cancel out envy. But it doesn't always work that way. Love, when unhealed, can still carry shadows. And when someone hasn't learned how to love themselves fully, they may struggle to love you without comparison. I once worked with a Sagittarius named Karina. She had a cousin she grew up with, close as sisters. But as they grew older, Karina's creative career began to take off. Her cousin, despite trying different things, hadn't found her place yet. At first, the distance was subtle. Less enthusiasm during Karina's big moments. Vague compliments. But then the sabotaging began. Her cousin started speaking critically about her behind her back, sharing her private doubts with others, making her seem flaky or selfish when she wasn't even present to defend herself. Karina was devastated. "I thought she was proud of me," she said. "But now I feel like she's quietly rooting for me to fail." Sagittarius, this is not uncommon. When someone feels left behind, they may begin to view your growth as a threat. Your evolution becomes a mirror they don't want to look into. And instead of facing their own pain, they project it onto you. But here's the thing. You are not responsible for their healing. You are not responsible for their pace, their journey, or their sense of worth. You can have empathy for their struggle while still holding them accountable for how they treat you. Envy is not your burden to carry. Still, you feel it. In the way they subtly discredit your ideas. In the way they celebrate others more loudly than they celebrate you. In the way they withdraw love, not out of punishment, but out of inability to hold your joy while they are drowning in comparison. Sometimes this envy turns into actions. They may discourage others from supporting you. They may share parts of your story that weren't theirs to tell. They may minimize your struggles or amplify your flaws. And all of it is done with enough subtlety to keep you questioning your own instincts. But Sagittarius, you're not imagining it. You were born to shine, but that does not mean everyone will feel comfortable in your light. And that is not your fault. The people who are meant to walk with you will not just tolerate your brilliance. They will celebrate it. They will know that your light does not dim theirs. That your success does not subtract from their worth. What matters now is that you see clearly. You no longer give your energy to those who secretly root against you. You no longer silence your wins to protect someone else's comfort. You no longer confuse loyalty with self-abandonment. You have permission to protect your energy, to adjust the distance, to speak your truth, not with venom but with clarity, to say, I see what's happening, and I will not shrink to keep peace with someone who's quietly at war with me. And you also have the right to grieve, to mourn what you thought the relationship was, to feel the sadness of knowing that not everyone who loves you will clap for you, that not every relative is a friend, that sometimes the deepest wounds come from the most familiar places. But grief is sacred. It clears the space for truth. It teaches you how to stay rooted in who you are, no matter how others twist the story. As we enter the next gate, we will begin to look even more closely at the subtle sabotage, the patterns, the behaviors, the energy that tries to dim you, and how to rise without becoming bitter, without closing your heart, and without ever asking for permission to be who you are. Gate 3. Subtle sabotage, the quiet ways they try to dim your light. Sometimes the wound doesn't come with a scream. It comes with a smile. Sagittarius, the sabotage you've experienced didn't erupt like thunder. Crept in slowly, quietly, and that's what made it so difficult to recognize. First, it may have seemed like miscommunication. Maybe they forgot to mention an opportunity. Maybe they left your name off a group message. Maybe they accidentally misquoted you in front of someone important. These moments felt small, but they added up. And slowly, they chipped away at your confidence, your joy, your sense of belonging. What makes this pain so unique is that it often hides beneath the surface of polite interactions. On the outside, they may appear supportive. They may smile at you in public, offer you shallow praise, even clap when others are watching. But in the background, a different story is unfolding. They discredit you in conversations you're not present for. They plant doubts in others' minds. They exaggerate your flaws and downplay your achievements. They frame your passion as arrogance, your confidence as recklessness, your ambition as selfishness. And because these acts are so well disguised, you begin to question yourself. Am I being too sensitive? Maybe I misunderstood. I should be grateful they still talk to me. But Sagittarius, this gaslighting of your own intuition is part of the damage. That constant second-guessing, that slow erosion of self-trust, that is sabotage too. I once spoke with a Sagittarius named Eli, a creative entrepreneur who noticed that every time he shared a new project with his cousin, someone he'd grown up with and deeply admired, it was met with lukewarm feedback. It's cool, I guess, she'd say. Or, are you sure you want to do that? Doesn't seem very stable. Then he found out she'd spoken to a mutual friend, calling his business a phase. She's just going through her dreamer period, she said. It wasn't cruelty, it was dismissal, minimization, a quiet attempt to make him feel small enough to stop growing. And that's what this kind of sabotage does. It's not meant to destroy you. It's meant to contain you, to keep you within a version of yourself that feels safe for them. A version that doesn't trigger their comparison, their insecurity, their unhealed resentment. But Sagittarius, you were never meant to be contained. Your light is disruptive not because it seeks to overshadow others, but because it reveals what others are afraid to acknowledge in themselves. Your success, your boldness, your freedom, these aren't weapons, but they become threatening in spaces where people have built their identity around playing small. This gate is about reclaiming your vision, because the sabotage you felt was never really about your actions, it was about your presence. And when your presence alone is enough to unearth someone else's pain, you have a choice. Either you shrink to make them comfortable, or you expand anyway. I want you to see something clearly now. Sabotage is never just a reflection of envy, it's a reflection of disempowerment. People who feel empowered don't need to undermine others. People who are whole don't need to fragment you. So instead of internalizing their criticism, release it. Instead of letting their doubts shape your path, let your own fire be your guide. Of course, it still hurts. These actions, however small, can feel like betrayals, because they often come from people you didn't expect to act that way. People you once leaned on, shared dreams with, trusted with your softer sides. So mourn them, Sagittarius. Mourn what you thought the relationship was. Give yourself space to feel the ache of being misunderstood, minimized, resisted. This grief is not weakness, it is truth. And truth, when fully felt, becomes freedom. Now, you're being called to move differently. To stop confiding in people who use your vulnerability as ammunition. To stop watering relationships that only bloom when you're wilting. To stop apologizing for the very traits that make you extraordinary. You don't owe anyone your silence just because they can't handle your voice. And you don't need to prove your worth by earning the approval of those who secretly resent you. Instead, protect your vision. Tend to your dreams like sacred flame. Build community with people who celebrate you out loud, not just when it's convenient. Surround yourself with those who feel inspired by your light, not threatened. Because here's what happens when you stop engaging with sabotage: it loses power. When you stop explaining, justifying, shrinking, their resistance meets a wall it can't climb. And in that space, you begin to breathe again. You return to your center. You remember who you are. You stop molding yourself to fit into spaces that were never built to hold your magnitude. In our final gate, we will explore the transformation that happens when you finally let go, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. When you rise, not to prove a point, but because you've remembered that you were never meant to hide in the first place. Gate 4. Transforming pain into freedom. Learning to shine without shrinking. There is a moment, Sagittarius, when something inside you quietly decides, no more. No more shrinking. No more explaining. No more pretending that the hurt didn't sting just because you've mastered the art of smiling through it. No more asking for permission to be whole. This is that moment. You didn't choose this wound. You didn't ask to be envied. You didn't invite sabotage into your path. But now that it has come, now that it has forced you to see what you'd rather not see, you do get to choose what you do next. And what your soul is asking you to choose is freedom. Not just physical distance or emotional closure, but something deeper. A kind of freedom that lives in the bones. A freedom that says, I will no longer dull my voice so others feel louder. I will no longer carry guilt for growing beyond the walls others stayed in. I will no longer make myself digestible for people who refuse to expand their appetite for joy. Because the truth is, Sagittarius, you were never too much. You were never too bold, too ambitious, too expressive, too passionate, too intense. You were just too free for someone still learning how to unlock their own cage. This final gate is where the pain turns sacred. You begin to understand that your light is not a weapon, but a calling. That your capacity to dream, to rise, to break cycles is not an offense. It's a gift. And yes, that gift might trigger others. It might cause discomfort. But you are no longer willing to betray yourself to keep someone else's shadow comfortable. This transformation isn't loud. It's quiet. Gentle. It happens in the stillness of your own reflection when you look in the mirror and say, I know who I am. I know why I came here. And I no longer need anyone else to agree in order for that to be true. It's the way you stop over-explaining your choices. It's the way you remove yourself from rooms that don't hold reverence for your soul. It's the way you begin to surround yourself with people who mirror your light. Not mimic it, not resent it, but meet it, love it, honor it. A Sagittarius woman I once guided, named Rhea, reached a turning point when she realized she had spent years dimming her joy around certain family members, just to avoid making them feel inadequate. She downplayed her travels, her creative projects, her spiritual growth. And yet it was never enough. Their discomfort with her was not about what she did, it was about who she was. So I stopped folding myself in half, she told me. And when I did, the right people found me. The ones who didn't need me to shrink in order to love me. That's what this gate is about. Choosing yourself, not in defiance but in devotion. Because when you finally choose to shine without apology, you give others permission to do the same. Not everyone will take that invitation, but the ones who do, they'll walk beside you in truth, not resentment. And in doing this, you also rewrite an ancient wound in your lineage. You say to the generations before you, I will not repeat the silence. I will not wear masks to be loved. I will not clip my own wings so others feel taller. You say to your future self, you are safe to grow. You are safe to love fully. You are safe to be seen. This is soul work, Sagittarius. And you are doing it. You are turning comparison into compassion for yourself and even for those who tried to hold you back. You are turning isolation into sovereignty, not needing others to validate your path in order to feel steady on it. You are turning pain into wisdom, wounds into wisdom, fire into light. And perhaps the most powerful thing of all, you are no longer hiding. Not from others, not from your truth, and not from the wild, radiant, irreplaceable brilliance that is uniquely you. As we move into the conclusion, we'll gather the threads of your journey. We'll weave the pain and the clarity and the courage into a tapestry of new beginnings. Because this isn't just an ending, Sagittarius. It's the return to your most powerful self. Conclusion: you were never too much. You were just becoming who you truly are. Sagittarius, as we arrive at the closing of this journey, I want you to pause for a moment and breathe. Really breathe. Into the center of your chest, into the corners of your being that once flinched at rejection, into the places where the betrayal lived. Because now, something has shifted. Something is freer. You've walked through the heartbreak of being envied by someone you trusted. You've looked directly at the quiet sabotage, the subtle dismissals, the uncomfortable truth that not everyone in your family celebrated you. And still you're here. Still rising. Still burning. Still choosing truth over approval. That's the mark of someone who has returned to themselves. You are not here to play small to soothe someone else's pain. You are not here to suppress your joy so others can avoid their shadow. You are here to expand, to live fully, to love boldly, to take up space not out of ego, but out of alignment with the magnitude of your spirit. From this day forward, may you protect your light as fiercely as you offer it. May you walk beside people who clap with their hearts, not just their hands. May you release the need to be understood by those still learning how to understand themselves. And when the old wounds ache, as they sometimes will, come back to this truth: you were never the problem. Your light didn't cause their envy. Their envy simply revealed what they had not yet healed. If this video has spoken to your journey, if it held you through a truth you've been carrying silently, I invite you gently to like, share, or subscribe. Not for numbers, but for connection, for community, for the collective rising we are all being called into. This is Sophia, and you've been watching Zodiac Wisdom. Until next time, keep your fire sacred, keep your heart open, and above all, keep shining.